Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
Good afternoon. You've made it to the final block of sessions. Congratulations. Hopefully you have had your coffee and your energy drinks and your all the exciting things, maybe a little sugar. Hi, welcome. My name is Robin Shuey. I'm the Director of Grants and Programs for the Cooney Foundation. Thank you so much for making your choice to join us today to learn about successful residency, tapping the state human resource. Let me try that again. Successful residency, tapping state human services resources to support vulnerable residents. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand off to our talented presenters to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Knapp, and I serve as the executive director of an organization called Community Vision, and we provide disability services in the Portland metro area.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Brett Turner. I serve as the CEO of an organization that's headquartered here in Portland called Advocates for Life Skills and Opportunity. We simply go by ALSO. And I'll share a bit more about myself as I get into the slide deck. But we serve 10 counties throughout Oregon, supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Shockley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the policy manager at the Office of Developmental Disability Services, which is a program in the Oregon Department of Human Services. And I think I'm up first, so I will try not to melt and talk a little bit more about what we do. So we are ODDS, the Office of Developmental Disability Services, is the system of supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through the lifespan. So we serve children and adults. There's no age limit or age minimum for our services. We rely on partnerships between our partner agencies like these two amazing folks here and lots of agencies across the state, families, advocates, our tribes, self-advocates, and nonprofits all across the state. And we collaborate to provide services, support, and advocacy to empower people with IDD or intellectual and developmental disabilities to live full lives in their community. Just a little bit more about why we do what we do. We do everything that we endeavor is to further our mission and vision. So our mission is that ODDS, our program, and our partners and the developmental disability community come together to provide services, supports, and advocacy to empower Oregonians with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live full lives in their communities. And our vision is that people and families access quality supports that are simple to use and responsive to their strengths, needs, and choices while they live and thrive as valued members of their community. So we serve right now over 33,000 Oregonians that have an intellectual or developmental disability and meet all of our eligibility requirements. That's over 10,000 children and over 23,000 adults. In order to be eligible for these services, a person must have either an intellectual disability, which is determined by an intelligence quotient score and their age and their ability to do certain day-to-day activities, or a developmental disability with an onset before age 22. That includes some deficits or needs around adaptive skills and their ability to handle day-to-day activities as well. Some people may have both an intellectual disability and a developmental disability. And then to access the vast majority of our services, they also have to meet financial eligibility for Medicaid, because primarily all of our services and supports are Medicaid funded. I want to highlight the specific services that folks can access through our program, and they can access these wherever they are. So Oregonians with intellectual and developmental disabilities do not live in institutions. We don't have large institutions or institutional settings anymore in Oregon for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Everything is home and community based, and the services and supports come along with them wherever they are, according to really their preferences, needs, and what they want their life to look like. We have two primary funding authorities. I won't dig into that, but It's important to just know that we provide attendant care services, which is what you might think of as a person that's helping another person do day-to-day activities. So eating, bathing, cooking, those kinds of things, a person that can actually help you accomplish those skills or tasks throughout the day in a variety of settings. Assistive technology, so technology that can be from low tech, mid tech, high tech to support a person to live more independently or accomplish a specific task throughout their home or in the community. Behavior services that address challenging behavior related needs. Again, all of these happening wherever a person may be. Nursing services for those people who have more complicated medical support needs. Home modifications indoors. Those are things like widening doorways so that someone's wheelchair can easily maneuver throughout the home, or different, let's see, wall hardening and wall softening, ramps to get into the home and out of the home safely. That's the only home modification under this authority that's actually outside, even though we call it inside. Things like that to help a person be more successful and safe in their home so they can keep living there rather than having to move to a setting that maybe isn't their choice, but does have those accessibility features that their current home lacks. We also provide transportation services so people can get around their community, get to the places that they need to go, and relief care, which is a backup planning type of service so that if someone's primary support is unavailable, they can still access the care that they need to live and thrive in their community. We also provide case management, employment services to help people get jobs and keep jobs, medical supplies to, again, help them live in the home that they choose to live in, modifications to vehicles so that vehicle is accessible to them regardless of their disability, training for family members to support them on how they can best care for and support their loved one that experiences a disability. Outdoor home modifications such as fencing or outdoor lifts that can get a person up the stairs into their home. Let's see, benefits counseling to help people manage their resources, their money, nursing services, and individual directed goods and services, which is just a more flexible resource for a particular group of children in Oregon. Most of these services are delivered in home. So by far, the vast majority of Oregonians with intellectual and developmental disabilities that receive our services live in a home that they own or rent, or they live with their family member who owns or rents a home. So that is by and large the vast majority of what we're talking about. And these services are coming into those homes with them. Hourly attendant care, like I shared, is that person-to-person support. So one human's helping another human do different things throughout the day. There are lots of different options for people of how they access these services. Some people choose to hire an employee of their own. That's called a personal support worker. And they self-direct that care and manage that worker like an employer-employee relationship. And they can also people can also choose to hire an agency that provides a little bit more oversight and support to a worker, while the person may choose to direct some of the day-to-day care or training of that person as well. And it's really an a la carte model. So it's hourly supports, and someone can choose to multiple workers, multiple agencies, any combination of that, whatever it is that best meets their needs for those kind of hourly supportive tasks. There's also supported living, which is a bundled one agency service with up to 24 hours a day of care and program coordination and on behalf of supports. So where someone may be out supporting you with grocery shopping and other tasks while you are at home or unable to participate for whatever reason in that task. And it's often coupled with housing supports. And these two folks will talk a lot more about the kind of uniqueness of this service, but it is also an in-home service that a person could live and rent or own their own home and receive this kind of more bundled, comprehensive level of support. And then other services available for people in the home, I talked about already, that transportation, behavior supports, technology, and home modifications are very often delivered in those settings where people own or rent or live with family. And I think we're saving questions for the end. So I'm going to pass it off to Brett.
Thank you, Caitlin. Sorry about, I'm not sure how the font there got messed up. Anyway, you might be wondering who these beautiful people are. Those are my 5 children. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. because I think it's important, the lens that I see things through, as I share why housing is so critically important in the work that I do and that we do, and how unique it is for individuals who experience IDD. As I shared earlier, I'm the CEO of Advocates for Life Skills and Opportunity. I'll just simply call it also from here on. I have done this work for 3 decades, actually 3.5 decades. Many of you are probably wondering, he doesn't look old enough to be doing that. Actually, you're probably not saying that, but I did start when I was 18. And yes, in fact, I have been doing this work for 35 years, and have been part of also since 2003, the CEO of since 2005. And why, I guess maybe just to back up, just to get a clarification for those of you not familiar with the IDD system. Caitlin is a part of ODDS, who is the Oregon Department of Developmental Disabilities. Jennifer and I happen to be service provider organizations that actually do the support work. Also is an organization that's headquartered here in Portland and that serves in 10 different counties throughout Oregon, in various capacities, but all those different kinds of services that Caitlin was just going through. You might, if you were searching different organizations, you might find organizations that do like one specific thing. Also happens to do, I think, everything that was on that list. So we happen to do a lot of different kinds of things, essentially just doing what people have asked us to do over the since our existence in 1997. So what needs to be considered for housing and why for people with IDD? Give you a little history in Oregon. Caitlin mentioned that that Oregon doesn't have any institutions. People that aren't familiar with the intellectual and developmental disability systems may not know that most states actually have institutions. Oregon closed theirs in the year 2000. And while I've done this work a long time, 3.5 decades, it doesn't feel fitting that in my time that Fairview was actually in existence. And I visited there and helped people move out of our state institution. Sadly, things that I can never forget as a young adult and professional, as a manager of what was then what we called a group home, went down there and helped people move out. I watched people take showers together and eat in settings that I wish I could forget. It was truly inhumane. Anyway, we're very thankful in Oregon that that is a thing of our past. Fast forwarding, there was a huge community integration program that happened in the 80s, 90s, and into 2000. And what is served now for the IDD population is primarily group homes that are, you know, as an organization that does this work, admittedly, is owned and controlled by a service provider like also. Another choice for people might be a foster home, which is also owned and controlled by that foster provider. Some people, either children and adults, oftentimes live with their family. They enter the system at all different places in their life. And I found this statistic online that I think is actually a much lower percentage than that, but it shares that less than 10% of people with IDD live on their own. And my anecdotal experiences is I find that percentage to probably be considerably lower. In the, I guess maybe backing up, why is housing so important to me? In the 35 years doing this work, I've just watched the system, essentially, not Oregon specifically, but just the system as a whole, force people into settings that they wouldn't necessarily choose to. I ironically Googled this picture, or excuse me, group home settings online, and ironically, this happened to be one of our programs in Sisters, Oregon. So anyway, it's probably not the most indicative and doesn't share the best story. What the point I'm trying to get across, this gentleman in the hat there is actually somebody that we helped move in with his girlfriend, who was, I guess, essentially, they lived in a foster home, had to move out during the pandemic because the foster provider refused to get vaccinated, and ended up moving into this home that we thankfully had in Sisters. And he has shared with us from the day he moved in there that he wanted to move in with his girlfriend, and selfishly, we made that happen for him, and he moved out last year. So very excited for him. But oftentimes that is exactly what happens is somebody like this person here would choose or not choose to necessarily live there. He would choose to live with his girlfriend. But because of housing as an issue and all of the other constraints that happen within our system, he moved in there. And don't get me wrong, he loved his roommates, enjoyed living in Sisters, but his choice would be to live with his girlfriend. So Caitlin mentioned supported living, and Oregon has lots of different options, probably more than most states. People can choose to live in home, and organizations like Also and Community Vision will go and support the person in their family's home or in their own home. Foster home is an option for people, group homes, or what we generally reference as 24-hour residential facilities. Supported living is really a beautiful model in that it supports people individually, and they can choose to live with other people. My experience is most people choose to live on their own. And this is the definition I took off of ODDS's website. But this is an option in Oregon for people who experience IDD or intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it is, I don't know the stats, Caitlin, but it is not utilized at a very high rate. Most people generally move into 24-hour residential or group homes and or foster care because housing comes with that service. And as an organization, we do that work. But I wish we did a lot more supported living. So how do we make supported living an option for people? Build affordable housing. We've been desperately trying for the last decade, probably closer to two, getting people on housing vouchers and trying to get them into affordable housing, and it's simply not available. And what oftentimes is available for affordable housing is not affordable for people living on Social Security income. So also did something to address this, and we actually are building, in the process of building our first affordable housing complex. It's well, I'll get into that in a minute, but none of that would have been possible if we didn't have these incredible partners to help us along the way, Greenlight Development and Home First. Helping create also apartments. We actually have more current renderings, which I should have updated. It's a much more beautiful building than this even shows, with colors and associated with it now. We're going through the branding process. This is a whole new experience for me, and for our team, it's been a lot of fun helping to a universally design. So this particular apartment complex is in Gresham. For those of you familiar with the Gresham area, it's actually where Division and Burnside intersect, maybe just west of on Division. This particular unit's a 4-story building. It's 39 units, 10 set-asides for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And those units will be set at the 30% of the area median income. The 29 units, I believe they're going to be at 60% of AMI. And then thanks to Jen and her team at Community Vision, they have their main office, which I don't know if this is part of your presentation, but we would not be able to do some of the work that we're doing, being able to actually walk into their office, see some of the adaptive cabinetry and some of the universal designs that they actually have available to show and give people ideas. We brought the architects, the designers, builders, developers, everybody that we could possibly, and thank you for opening those doors up for us. Anyway, it's been incredible what is coming out of that. Anyway, other things to consider is access to public transportation, amenities, and essential services. Being in the location it has very, very easy access to all these different things. And our partnership with Greenlight Development and Home First has also made this opportunity an option, the Bend Atwood Apartments. I didn't actually mention we're currently calling this also apartments, but we feel pretty strongly that we want this apartment complex to be a part of the Gresham community, the people that are going to be living there. So it's actually not going to be called also apartments. We're actually in that process right now to figure out its own branding, colors and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, our partnership with our developers is creating Bend Atwood Apartments. And it's actually 2 phases. The first phase is 98 units. It has 15 set-asides for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at also the 30% area median income, which I believe is pretty close to the same AMI as the Portland area. The additional units are going to be around 60. They also, we're utilizing all the same kinds of concepts that we're doing with the Gresham build into this build and Bend. And for those of you familiar with Central Oregon or the Bend specifically, if you were heading south on Highway 97, there's a relatively new apartment complex that was built in the last year or two, or finished, I should say, in the last year or two. It's directly past that in a 10-acre parcel. Anyway, it will also have a 3,500 square foot community space, and we're going to get to replicate Community Vision's universally designed kitchen so that we can showcase and share how that works for other people. Some things I wanted to share with you and why I think it's so important, and we talk about affordable housing and truly making it affordable for people with IDD. Not everybody's income is exactly the same, but I would say from my experience, more people than not have the average Social Security income payment of $943 a month. And as you can imagine, the rent has to be pretty low to be able to afford that. People have been waiting on waiting lists. I mean, for so many years, we've lost track. There's simply not, it's just become not available. 30% AMI is actually attainable for people with IDD. And both very specific design and universal designs are both elements that that I think are really important to consider in making sure that it is accessible for people with like wheelchair users, people that have sight limitations, and all these different kinds of things that have to be considered. And assistive technologies. Thanks again to Community Vision, and we have a team of people that are utilizing and practicing assistive technologies, and all of this stuff and being considered in both of these builds. So this is an example of picture. I don't think it's actually Community Vision's office, but they have a very similar kind of elevator button, and Jennifer shared with me when we were touring the building. These are the little simple things that are so critically important that have to be thought about as this design is happening. And while this is very specifically might be the only option for somebody to be able to kick and or some maybe other options to activate the elevator, Jen shared with us that it also is incredibly helpful for somebody when you have a handful of stuff. And so these are the kinds of things that are being considered. And interestingly enough, this is all new territory for us. We're talking with designers, and we had this kind of debate the other day when we were talking about the sinks being located in a space, and so that it's accessible, particularly for somebody who might be, have height limitations, or somebody that might be a wheelchair user. Getting to actually reach to the back of the sink is one of those things that highly considered. And we could make specific units for those, but it could be that if you just put the sink on the side, the faucet on the side, then it's accessible for everybody. And it was interesting that little thing sparked this really huge debate, and people had very, very strong feelings about it. And that's just one of those things, like everybody can use a sink that's side mounted. But there are some people that simply can't use the faucet if it's mounted in the back. And I also wanted to say thanks to Terry Silvas, for those of you that might have been in the room before this session. She was presenting. I don't think that we would have been able to kick off or have the confidence that we would be doing the Gresham apartment complexes are part of the 9% tax application. We were awarded, we had to wait an entire year and a half because of the pandemic to get awarded that. We missed it by the narrowest margin. Apparently that's ever been awarded the first time. And so we submitted it again. Thankfully, we own the land the second time. And so I think that helped us actually get that off the ground. The other project in Central Oregon is not part of a tax application. It's just affordable housing. So anyway, that's a little bit about also why we're so passionate about what we do. And we are really struggling so much to help people find independent, inclusive housing. We decided to build it ourselves. So anyway, that's our story.
Thanks, Caitlin and Brett. So my role here today is to kind of put some pieces together. So you heard Caitlin talk about the type of services that are available through the state for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then Brett shared some of the unique challenges facing this population when it comes to housing. And so I want to kind of put this in a little bit of context, but I would love to just understand a little bit about who's in the room. So anybody in this room who's involved in tenant services, so residential services of any sort. Okay, I thought you all are our people, love you. Anybody who is more on the advocacy side of the world. All right, also our people. Developers. Any developers? Okay, couple. People from local jurisdictions or state jurisdictions or agencies. Okay, so a nice variety. I figured we'd get quite a few residential services people. And the reason I ask is because, again, some of the things that Caitlin was talking about, we want you to know that these are services that are available to potentially to your tenants that you don't have to do, right? An organization like One of Us can come and do that. But we really want to be able to work with you. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the pieces that relate to you all in the housing world. So the first thing I want to just talk about is how do people with disabilities get into housing? So I'm sure all of you are aware of different types of housing navigation services available for different populations. For the folks that we're working with, there hasn't been a system built. There aren't great ways to do housing navigation. So there are some examples. I have the urban option and the rural option up here. So in Portland Metro, there's a few provider agencies like ourselves who are just taking that on to say, again, as Brett pointed out, so many people with disabilities are not living on their own, and partly because they don't have help finding ways to get into housing. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're providing that service. In other parts of the state, there are case management entities who are working with people with disabilities, and they are the ones providing housing navigation to the extent that they can. So just want to make you aware, unfortunately, there's not this beautiful, well-organized system for folks with disabilities to get into housing, but there are some pockets where different types of entities, either providers or case managers, are providing that housing navigation service. So I'll just give you the example of us here in the Portland area. So Community Vision is the name of our organization, and we provide housing navigation for both people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or physical disabilities. And we have some criteria. So we require a monthly gross income of $1,200 a month and as a minimum, and that is because of just the affordable housing landscape that all of you are very familiar with, and those area median incomes that Brett was referencing. And we just do this in the Portland metro area. And the services that we provide is helping people to plan what kind of housing they want. Again, many of the people that we are working with have never lived outside their family home. So this is a brand new experience, and thinking about what might it be like to not have mom and dad there. And so there is some work to be done around what sort of how long that might take to actually get into your own place, what sort of services they might need, again, from what Caitlin had talked about. And then we provide some tenant education and individual advocacy. So it's important for folks to understand both their rights and responsibilities as a tenant. Unfortunately, folks with disabilities are often still facing quite a bit of discrimination when it comes to housing. And so understanding what their legal rights are as they move into housing is really critical. And then we do the very fun job of actually helping to match people with apartments. And here's where there is a challenge that I know many of you have experienced too, where there's not a list anywhere, right? You have to go and find all of these different apartments. So there's some people that we support that we have applied to over 30 different wait lists for them, just to see what will come up. And then once there is that match, we help with move-in support. So some of the benefits that we have found, especially working with this group of people, with disabilities for housing navigation, is one, that having somebody like us to provide that helps with getting all of that paperwork together, and making sure that everything's completed correctly. So those of you who are in leasing, right, you know all of the steps that people need. They need their birth certificate, they need a social security card. Many of the folks we are working with don't have that. Maybe they've been houseless, so it takes some time to be able to get all of that together. So we're working with a housing navigator, helps them to make sure that they can gather all of those things over time, so that by the time they're applying, it's all together and there's no further delays on their application. And as you also probably are aware, if you are delayed, then often the leasing agent needs new information. So maybe new work information, you have to gather that all again. So we think it's really helpful to work with a housing navigator to be able to gather all of that in one place. The next big thing that we have found is, especially working with folks for whom housing is pretty new, is it can be really, really exciting just to go to the first place that you can find and say yes and sign a lease. Unfortunately, that can sometimes get people in situations that they can't sustain. And so we have really found it to be helpful doing that tenant education to help people to understand their own budget and do some financial education about what you can actually afford so that you can be successful once you move in. And then finally, tenant education helps folks to understand the mutual benefits of having a good relationship with landlords. And I have found for this population can be a little, careful about systems. And so some people are coming in with the idea of the landlord is going to be against me. And so I have to come in with my fists up, basically. And so we've been able to help people understand that, hey, actually, sometimes they're on your side. And if you can develop a relationship, if you maybe ever do need a favor in the future, they're going to be a lot more likely to give that to you if you haven't made them mad. So again, part of that just relationship development and helping people to understand that landlords aren't necessarily the bad guys, right? That there can be really good things by having a positive relationship. And so some of the lessons that we have learned from doing this with folks is that, first of all, we need a lot more of it. We need a lot more housing navigation, and that is working on various different ways to make that happen. But some key things that hopefully can relate to your worlds, one Brett already mentioned, is when there are housing complexes that have set-asides or at least priority for folks with disabilities, particularly for their accessible units, it can be so helpful. There's not great information about how many accessible units we have in our world, but some of the housing work that we have done, we have learned that there's less than 1% of rental units are accessible. And so you all know how difficult it is just to find affordable. Imagine if you're also looking for accessible. And so we have been able to partner with some, I see, I'm going to call Nick out in here, with like Rose Development to do some set-asides to say, we know that folks with disabilities have extra barriers in finding housing. So if we can prioritize a few units for those folks, it's just going to make things a lot better. And that has allowed us as housing navigators to develop a relationship with that developer, and make sure on the design side too, that things are going well. So that leads me to this next one is we desperately need resources for both landlords and tenants regarding accessible units. This is a huge gap in our systems right now. There's a lack of understanding of where accessible units exist among you all, among us. There's no registry, and I know there's some work happening at the state level and some of the local levels, but this is a huge gap. And specifically, there's some really terrible stories of folks who have been looking for accessible apartments and have ended up basically stuck in their apartment because it wasn't accessible and they haven't been able to leave because they couldn't get out. So we want to make sure that that is an area that we change. And then finally, as any housing navigation entity can tell you, to recognize that the organization that helps make the match is not necessarily responsible for the tenant actions going forward, right? Just like any tenant, there's things going on. And so just navigating that, we certainly have provided advocacy and support, but just recognizing the different roles of housing navigators versus those who are providing ongoing services. So just to kind of recap a little bit about what Caitlin and Brett have talked about. So for disability ongoing services, each person hires their own providers. So this is pretty different than the world you all might find yourselves in, where typically a housing complex might contract with a provider in the place. DD services, the person brings their services with them. And so the thing that is nice about that is that you all as housing people aren't responsible for those services. The challenge is you might be working with 10 people with disabilities and they might have 10 different providers. So there's a bit of a coordination challenge, but that also means that there's additional services available to you. And so, yeah, as we kind of talked about, just so that you are aware, these services that we're talking about today are paid through Medicaid long-term care. So not through the homeless system, they're not through housing, and that's really for the person's day-to-day support needs. And that doesn't mean that they don't want to be involved in resident services and activities. We'll get to that. But in terms of, I think there's lots of a misnomer that with this population, oh, if this person moves into my building, that means I've got to provide a lot of day-to-day life skill support. And it's just not true. That those services are provided through ODDS. And then I also just want to hit this because I think this is a really confusing point about permanent supportive housing. So often people assume that folks with disabilities are in need of permanent supportive housing. But as I talked about, because they bring their own services with them, it's often not necessary. So folks can just be in apartments throughout our cities and communities, and they don't necessarily need the PSH services because of the ones that they bring with them. So let's give some examples, make this a little bit more real about some actual people. So here is Jonathan. And here's an example where us as Community Vision, we both provided the housing navigation and the ongoing DD services. So Jonathan, for housing navigation, we helped this wonderful man apply to 26 apartments because he is somebody, as Brett mentioned, who lives on Social Security. And so he has $900 a month. He now has a part-time job, so that is helpful, but he needed subsidized housing. And so our housing navigation services helped him to apply to these wait lists, kept checking in, because as you know, if you just do it once, nothing happens. You have to just keep checking in, seeing where you're at. And then magically, in the same week, he got to #1 on 2 different lists. It was amazing. After waiting for several years, all of a sudden he got to the top on 2 different lists. And so he had the amazing opportunity to actually make a choice of which one he wanted to live in. And we worked with him on that, and he chose downtown Portland because it was pretty close to where he worked and where he had good connections. So that was an amazing victory to help him actually to move out into his own place in downtown Portland. And then that's kind of where the housing navigation services stopped and the ongoing services come in. So we happen to do both of these for him. And so our staff now helps him with things like keeping his apartment clean. We provide representative payee services. So we help him to manage his money to make sure that his amount of rent is paid every month. So again, folks with disabilities often have that kind of support with them. We help him manage his calendar and make sure that he gets to his appointments. So that is ongoing and forever because he has a developmental disability that lasts for life. And so he has access to these services for his lifetime. And then I always just want to say, so the building that he's in also has residential services, and he loves attending things that you all create. So hopefully the message you get is not, oh, people with disabilities don't need residential services, but you don't need to provide their day-to-day needs, but they would love to be connected to their community, to other tenants, to resources that you provide. So Jonathan is a great example. This is him when he moved in with the big thumbs up. So, he needed housing navigation to get in there. Community Vision could do that. He needs his ongoing services to help him with his day-to-day tasks. And he needs you all to help him stay connected to those in the area. So here's another example of Jenny. And here is where, Community Vision offered the housing navigation, and then there's a different service provider now who's doing the ongoing services. So Jenny is a great example because she actually lived in a group home and was really unhappy there. She desperately wanted to be in her own place. And so we were able to provide housing navigation and do the whole process. And Matt, she's somebody who's in a wheelchair. And so she needed an accessible apartment. And so Sabin CDC is who partnered with her, and they've developed actually all of their units are accessible in this particular development, which is a great idea because turns out if folks with disabilities can get in, other people can get in too. Anyway, so that was a great match. And then for Community Vision, once we helped her move in, again, we handed off the ongoing services to another provider. They're called Community Access Services. So even within the disability world, it is possible to have one group helping somebody to move in and then another to do the ongoing. So some of the lessons that we have learned doing the ongoing part of services is that it is often super helpful to include the service provider in communication. It just leads to a lot better efficiency and understanding. So I know that's sometimes complicated with you all and with property management, but it is so helpful. That's really part of what we're here for, is to help with understanding so that the resident knows what's going on. One thing that hasn't happened yet, but I would love to see happen if anybody can help work on this, is it would be amazing to have, like the main rules on one page in plain language. It is a dream that I have that someday is going to happen. But again, we know you have legal things that you have to do, but so many of the folks that we are working with get very confused on the different things and what's going on. And so we'd be happy to work with you on this, but to create kind of a one page, here are the key things you need to know in language that's understandable would be really helpful. And then, again, I've already kind of mentioned this, but desperately want you to know that folks with disabilities don't want to be separate. They don't want to be segregated away from everyone else. They want to be part of communities. And so please, when you're doing community activities in your buildings, include your residents with disabilities. Even though it might take an extra step or two, often you can use the service providers to help make that connection. But we want to make sure that folks can be included. And then, so just a couple of things. Again, I know different ones of you are in different situations, but that we would love from you as we're talking about kind of the disability community here. So one I kind of already mentioned with that one pager, but want to expand it to just improving accessibility in communication. So certainly physically accessible units matter, but being able to have communication that is in simple language, that maybe has things like icons in addition to words, those kinds of things can be so helpful. Or, people who are blind and use screen readers, there's different kinds of websites that's way easier for them to read, those sort of things. We are in an era that accessibility really matters. And if there's any way we can help you to make communication more accessible, again, bonus, it doesn't just benefit people with disabilities, it also benefits people who might be learning English for the first time or who are kids. There's a whole variety where accessible communication can benefit a lot of folks. Second is we would love to connect with you. For so long, there's been kind of this disability world and the housing world, and never the two shall meet. We are hoping to meet. We are here. We would love to get to know you better. This is part of why we brought people like Caitlin, even at the state level, because we're all throughout the state, and we know you are too, and we would love to make better connections between the disability world and the housing world. And then finally, it would be super helpful if there could be clear accommodations and modifications processes in your buildings. This is often the biggest frustration for folks with disabilities. We have looked at fair housing statistics, and 60% of the fair housing complaints come from folks with disabilities, and it's usually related to this. And people want to work with you. People with disabilities, your tenants want to work, but just having a clear process for people even to know how it works would be incredibly helpful. So those are just some tips or hopes that we have as we are thinking about how to continue to provide excellent services. Again, we as the disability system will do a lot, but we're also hoping that our partners in the housing world will as well. So with that is our presentation. We wanted to make sure and leave time for conversation, questions, thoughts. You can challenge us, you can comment, you can ask questions, but with that, we'll hand it over to Robin.
And I'm the mic courier, so if anyone has any questions, I'll come to you.
I have a question about K-plan qualification. And so it was with an IQ assessment, is that correct? Is that the door into K-plan? It's kind of it's a little bit more. So basically, what I really want to know is how are people with developmental disabilities who probably couldn't navigate a system, how are they getting into services like K-plan? Is it transitionary from school? Because I saw the age is 22. What IQ test are you talking about? Is that the door? I mean, there's archaic IQ tests. So I guess I'm wondering about the accessibility, for somebody to get into those amazing services. What's the process for that?
I'll bring the mic to you, Caitlin. And Jennifer and Brett. Anyone can answer.
That's a great question. A couple things. The K-plan is like a funding authority, so it's a way that it's a part of our state Medicaid plan that provides access to specific services. But people are eligible for intellectual and developmental disability services at any age, so that they can become eligible as children and as adults, even after age 22. There's two doors. One is there's two types of eligibility, and then I'll talk about the front door. So there's an intellectual disability, which is based on someone's IQ score. And you're right, that is an archaic test, even one that has roots and very ugly racist origins, right? But that still is by a psychologist or psychiatrist. The way that people identify their IQ score, and that is a component of being eligible as a person with an intellectual disability. There's also a requirement of having needs in certain adaptive areas. So your ability to do daily tasks and to help yourself, those kinds of things are a component as well. And then there's the developmental disability door, which is you don't have to have an intellectual disability. So that's important to know that not everyone with IDD has an intellectual disability. Some do not, many do not. And that's just based on your ability to do specific tasks. And there's assessments, standardized assessments that are used to make that determination too. But that happens by first entering a community developmental disability program. So that those are local level entities, most often county governments that contract with the state, and someone goes there usually with their family if they're a child. They could be referred by a doctor's office, a pediatrician, through a school system, many different places, but the front door to services is through that community developmental disability program, usually at the county government level. They apply and then they're supported to access any testing that is needed to determine them eligible. Quite often, if someone's coming from a school system or they have, they aren't really, really young, there's already documentation that suffices. So there's no need to repeat this process and go through another battery of testing when maybe they're eligible for special education as a child with an intellectual disability. That test has been done. There's lots of medical records and other things to rely on. So that's how they can, get through the front door. But if you know someone and they maybe don't have services, or you don't know if they have services, you don't know if they might qualify, it's absolutely welcome to refer them to offer them information about their local CDDP or Community Developmental Disabilities Program so that they can go and explore that for themselves if that's something they want, or if they might need support from you or a trusted person, a loved one to help them do that. That's wonderful as well. So all of that's available, but usually people come in, I'd say most often as children, and they may be referred by special education or in transition age when they're in high school and they're getting ready to transition to adulthood. There's a lot of really good collaboration that happens between the school system, the developmental disability system, and the vocational rehabilitation system. That kind of coming together is often the time when someone reaches out and applies for services, and maybe they didn't need them as a child and now they do as an adult, but it can happen at any age. Yeah.
Other questions? Sorry, I keep running you over.
I actually have a question for you. You were saying that in order to be a part of your program, that they had to have 1,200 day plus income. I happen to be a disabled adult. I don't make 1,200 plus. And most disabled people I know don't. So how are you supposed to help me if I was living with my parents or with my kids even and wanted to go out on my own? Now, and the other part of my question is, you're having people go into affordable housing, which is 60% AMI. What about low-income housing, which is 30% AMI? So there's a two-part question there. Like I said, $1,200 is a lot of money for those people that are disabled and living on Social Security.
I'll bring the mic around.
Excellent question. Thanks for asking. So again, the reason that we have picked $1,200 is because you're absolutely right that there are many people who are on SSI who make more like 900 a month, right? And because we are a 3-person team, there's only so much that we can do as an individual provider. So we are not trying to serve every single person I'm just giving you an example of what we do as housing navigation. I think your point is well taken. One of the things that we're also working on, we're talking about services today, but one of the things we're absolutely working on is rent assistance, because the only reason we have that limit is because so many, otherwise your only option is often subsidized units, which we certainly help people to get into as well. But often people are needing it to move faster. And so we have actually just started working with our counties to be able to work with people who have less income. So the only reason we set that is to not set people up for failure, to be quite honest. But we've actually experimented with some rent assistance programs that were short term to then hopefully we found that 3 years is about long enough to get people either into employment, because folks with disabilities can work, to get maybe up to that 1,200, or that can be a time to get into longer term subsidized units that take a little longer. So we are developing some bridge. I just don't want to talk about it and give people false hopes because it's just so limited, because as you all know, rent assistance is hard to come by and super expensive. But it's absolutely what is needed as we keep moving this forward. So that was there was another question that you. Correct. Yeah. So thank you. The other part of the question was about just looking for affordable. And let me be very clear that we are not just looking at affordable. And in affordable units, some of them have 30% AMI units, as like Brett mentioned with his. Some of them will be 30%, some will be 60%. So most of the people that we are able to match, we've matched about 125 people in recent years. Most of them are in 30% AMI units. So, oh yeah, that is definitely our goal. It's just that, again, we're trying to understand the world that we're in and help people to make matches. So, and then there's other people who, again, if you're just living on SSI, you're not even at the 30% threshold, right? You're really only able to get fully subsidized units. So there's certainly people that we're working with that it just often takes 5, 6, 7 years for folks to be able to get through those wait lists. So we're absolutely using the whole gamut. We're just also trying to not set people up for failure. We want to set people up for success. So great questions. Thanks for clarifying. Sorry that I didn't communicate that better when I was presenting.
Other questions in the room? Come on, right. We'll come here and then to you.
Hi, I just had a question about supporting folks who get later onset IDD or have it due to an accident or injury later on beyond the age of 20. The support's out there for them because that does change their condition of living and also affects their ability to control their income and things of those natures. And I've had a couple residents that I've worked with that, you know, when I've reached out to IDD resources, they say, unfortunately, they're not eligible just because of those limiting restrictions. So I'm just wondering what else is out there for people who do get it IDD later on in their life or injury related disabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's another great question. I'll start with intellectual and developmental disabilities as they're defined in our rules. So just as they're defined by the system, have that onset earlier in life. So for an intellectual disability, it's an onset before age 18 in those developmental years. And then for a developmental disability, an onset before age 22, but they can become determined eligible much later in life if we can establish, oh, they had this occurred, or, you know, way before 22 or before 18, depending on the disability type. There's another program in the Oregon Department of Human Services called Aging and People with Disabilities. And that system serves those that have a traumatic brain injury or other accident related disability later in life, and those that are experiencing things that have needs similar to people with disabilities due to aging. So that's the system that would be available in the situations that you're describing, and they too have the same K plan. So the services that I described in the beginning, like that person-to-person assistance where, you know, someone's helping you with cooking, cleaning, daily activities, the people who are receiving aging and people with disability services have access to that as well. Same thing for assistive devices, some home modifications and things like that. So that system is available. It's administered a little bit differently because of course systems seem to be as complicated as possible. But if you want to connect after, I can give you some information just where you can find that on the ODHS website and connect with the local offices to support people to go through that eligibility process for them.
Great questions today. I'm loving it.
Mine has to do with home modifications. So I'm a rehab specialist for Polk CDC, and I run into we help people modify their homes for disabilities, ADA stuff all the time, walk-in showers or whatever. But my main question is when you say you help, is that you funding that specifically? And have you ever co-partnered with like a program, like a grant program, CDBGs or anything like that, in order to make their other money go towards other repairs in the home? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so ODDS, our program funds certain home modifications, and the homeowner or landlord person will work with their landlord, or if they are the homeowner, will work with local vendors like contractors that can come in and do the work, and then we pay for it. And it has to be related to their disability, and there are some limits with what can be authorized at a local level versus what takes a little bit longer and needs to come to the state level to be approved. But it doesn't include things that are for general utility, like there could be a leaky roof in a house, and that's a safety concern for all that are living there, but it's not a direct tie to the person's disabilities, like a ramp would be, or widening of doorways, or a bathroom that is waterproof all around for somebody that maybe just likes water a lot and they need that kind of support for their bathroom to be safe and long lasting. But it doesn't cover things like repairs, unfortunately, for other kind of general household maintenance and repairs and things like that. But as far as extending funding and braiding funding, I'll leave it to Jen.
Yeah, as we all know, one source usually doesn't do it. So yes, I think, well, hopefully what you can hear today is that ODDS is maybe another source to put in your pocket of potential things. But typically what we find is, cover your ears, Caitlin. Sometimes the process can be a little arduous and not worth it, depending on.
Yeah, we're working on making that process better.
So, but yeah, so certainly sometimes it is worth it, but we certainly work with local, again, we're in the Portland metro area. And so there's things like unlimited choices. I don't know if you're familiar with them, that will also do it and pay for some of these services. So sometimes Community Vision has actually developed a fund because we realize how important this is. So yeah, the reality is we often are going to multiple sources to be able to make it happen. But it is good to know that ODDS at least can be one of those funding sources we can pull from.
Coming your way.
Want to make sure I have the acronym correct. AMI, is that correct? Reference to that. How is that calculated? Who does that calculation? What documentation is used to pull that together to make that?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's taking everybody out.
So there are definitely some people in this room that can answer this better, but I will take a go at it. Yeah. So AMI stands for Area Median Income. And this is determined not by service providers like us. It is definitely by people higher than up. Does anybody actually know who determines area median income? I love that. Let's go with that. Local housing authorities. So this is, yeah, it's determined for the whole area. So it's basically what they do is they figure out, as they look at the income of all of us in the community, what is average? So area median income, right, the middle, and then they just kind of chunk it down. So it's basically to determine So for people who are in affordable housing, if they're making less than what the average person is making, hopefully their rent should be lower than what the average person pays. So it's by, thank you, by the housing authorities, and all of us use it. And you can just go online and just type Portland area median income, and you'll find out both like what those percentages are, and then for affordable housing, what the rent limits are for every different area or different, what's the word I'm looking for? Category, I guess is the right word. Does that help answer your question? Yep. Yeah, and then in terms of, so again, that's just kind of set. And then for an individual, they're just sharing what their income is. That they just do what their gross income is, and then the housing developer, property manager will determine where they fit. And Nick, not to put you on the spot, but if there's anything else you want to add, because I know you know way more about that than me.
Do you have something to add, Nick? Great. And then we have a question from Zoom.
So I think it's actually HUD, the federal government, that sets the area median income. But one thing to know is it varies by household size. So it'd be less for a single person than a family of three.
Thank you, Nick. Oh. Thank you, HUD. All right. Other questions? Here we go.
Hi, I'm with Fair Housing, so my question is related, but one of the things that you mentioned that was helpful in this arena was set-asides for IDD residents. The good news is I've been getting calls from people that are interested in doing this. The bad news is people are recognizing that there is a fair housing implication. How are you thinking about the fair housing implications? Because obviously, from our perspective, you can prioritize people with disabilities. It's a little more difficult once you start discerning between types of disabilities, like IDD versus injury-related disabilities versus purely mobility-related disabilities. How do you think about that when you're thinking about the IDD set-asides?
Always love those fair housing people calling us out. Thank you, thank you. So apparently, I think the actual terminology should be prioritized as opposed to set aside. So meaning other people could be eligible, but you want to first look for people who need, say, that accessibility. So yeah, thank you for clarifying. Set asides is just easier for people to wrap their heads around, but you're right. Technically, it's not set asides because other people need, so that it doesn't violate fair housing, need to be able to do that. Again, for the people that we are working with, we don't specify by disability. We work with a little bit of a broader range of folks. So I'll let Brett talk about the IDD specific.
Yeah, I would say that it's something that we're still navigating. I'm familiar with another development that happened here in the Portland area where something similar was set up. And as it turns out, that didn't work out the way they hoped it would. I didn't mention this in when I was talking, but our interest in developing affordable housing is really just to develop affordable housing specifically for people with disabilities. It's not specifically for people that are supported by also. If it so happens to work out that way, we're going to be super happy about it. But it's not intended to be developed for folks. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, we're still navigating that, and we're still new at this, but certainly familiar with some situations that have happened recently. This is completely off subject. I sat down and I thought, I showed a picture of my kids and I didn't even say why. And he was just bragging about his beautiful children. The person, and I can't quickly go back to it. The Parker is our youngest. He's 9. Sure, if you wouldn't mind. He's our youngest. He's 19. He currently lives in Medford. He does not want to live with his parents forever. He lives his life through the lens of, he's the one there with the lab. Ian Parker is the one in the green shirt with his lab, Ian, his service dog. He does not want to live with his parents forever. And so he is certainly a big motivation in us developing housing for people like Parker. And I often talk about, even the people that hundreds, if not thousands of people that I've worked with over my 35 years, each person has unique wants and needs. And so when I think about, developing housing, Parker's certainly in the back of my mind, in the front of my mind, but I also think about every single person's specific needs. So anyway, I didn't just show that picture to brag about my beautiful children. It's actually, Parker is a big reason why we're doing this work.
Just to go back to your question too, another thing that I think it was the Housing Authority in Jackson County alerted me to is, again, so much of the issue is we don't have enough accessible units. And then so many of the accessible units that we do have are with people who don't necessarily need that accessibility. And so one way, again, set-asides or prioritization is one way, but another solution that they're exploring in Jackson County is basically an addendum in people's leases if they move into an accessible apartment that they don't need, is that there will be, like, and somebody with a disability comes, then there will be moving assistance for them, but to actually write it into the lease that, hey, you're basically on borrowed time while you're in this accessible apartment. We're not going to kick you out, but there's other ways too that people are exploring. If you can't do it on the front end, that sometimes you can do it on the back end to make sure that the people who really need those units are the ones who get them. So another thing that some jurisdictions are exploring.
An online question? Okay. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction. And Oregon and locally, we have the ability to develop middle housing, right? 2 ADUs, cottage clusters, we can do land divisions. We have at the state level the ability to do homeowner associations and to sell condos and individual properties, complicated pathways. The question is, what kind of supports are there for lack of a better term, mom and pop landlords who are interested in taking on the refiguring of their homes and properties to allow for IDD folks to live there? Basically to own an ADU and rent it to their child. In these ways, technical assistance, grant programs, legal assistance, things that could give people information to get them to housing stock, adding to the housing stock of accessible housing for families. And I know this is kind of an emerging question because these policies are coming to HB 2001 came on the books just a couple of years ago. Portland's residential infill project is just on the books in the last 5 years, but it seems like an area that's an opportunity for bringing more housing on stock, but it's really complicated for folks who don't understand the zoning code, the K plan, Medicaid waivers. Is there anything out there, or should we be advocating for things to provide people with the supports and technical assistance they need to do that?
Alan, bring in the big question.
What an excellent question. So the answer is definitely there's nothing great right now. So let me just be really clear. So community vision, again, we like to experiment. And so one of the things that we just did actually with the support of the Cooney Foundation is we did an ADU project. So we did 4 ADUs and 2 tiny homes in the Portland area, and exactly wanted to answer that question of, will it work? And so we have homeowners. We actually partnered with homeowners who got their homes through Proud Ground. I don't know if people are familiar with Proud Ground, but it's a land trust. So it was already people who had benefited from affordable housing programs themselves. And now having an ADU was a way to build their own wealth while also kind of giving back to their community. So it was a great partnership. And so we developed some tenant resource or, landlord resources for them because actually City of Portland has some great information for landlords. So we kind of, again, did that plain language that we talked about for the landlord side of, okay, here are the rules that you need to know about. Like, you are a landlord, they're paying rent to you. And so we have some basic information, and we created kind of a case study and guide, but they're really just the start. So I think to your point, there is a lot more to explore. Another entity that is really leading a lot of this creative work is out of Eugene. They're called Mainstream Housing, and they're doing a lot of experimenting with different kinds of smaller homes because, yeah, not everybody wants to live in a big apartment complex, and people with disabilities included. So I think you're onto something. This is another whole area to explore. Again, we have a couple of resources on our website about the ADUs, but Mainstream Housing is another one. But this is definitely an area I think that we will develop many more resources over the coming years. So great question. Anybody want to?
Any additional questions in the room? All right, seeing none, please join me in, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I missed you. Thank you.
Well, we're talking about the big city, Portland, and I work in a rural area. And if I understand, I have 6 units specially built for special needs. But do we have any resource list that it's available? Because sometimes when we have that openings, we cannot just afford to leave it open and see if somebody comes. Do you have a list of people that actually is willing to go forward and move to a rural area? Because that will gonna make sense to have that units, and they're available. It just, we don't know where the people could be. We only have 3 residents, which actually are using that special areas.
Great, the list.
Definitely appreciate the rural shout out. So what I would recommend is, so back to the first, there are case management entities in every community. So I'm happy to chat with you afterwards. Those would be the people who would be most likely to know who they serve that might be looking for those apartments. So I think that's the best way to make connections between the disability service system and people who have housing, is those case management entities. So depending on where you live, I'll be happy, or Caitlin might know better who the right resource is, but that's where I would start. And they would likely know who they have that is looking for housing.
Great question. Anyone else? Okay, I think I've seen the whole room. Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. And now we'll get you out of the hottest room on the face of the planet. Thank you for coming.